I welcome Andrew Drinkwater for this podcast. This is a podcast where I try to demystify what is it to build a platform which just gives an insights about data. He is the co-founder and the president of Plate Analytics, which is a Canadian firm which is going to give insights about how data is all about today. It can be megabytes of data, gigabytes of data, it doesn't matter. But as long as you get the insights of a data, yes, you are a data scientist. So now this Plate Analytics is a firm which focuses on getting more of insights on educational data. So working on educational data is something which is more fascinating because it's not a kind of a critical but yet a critical data in order to decide the future of students. So I welcome Andrew Drinkwater for this podcast, and thank you, Andrew Drinkwater, for giving me this amazing podcast.
Good start. Thanks very much for having me, Vishwas. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Of course, Plain Analytics has been launched since 2016. Of course, Plain Analytics is launched in 2016. Initial serving was very rough. Of course, when it's a startup, it's a very rough path when you choose. It's a startup which basically serving all the Canadian universities and colleges. You can share what Plate Analytics does in an everyday fashion. Like, what's your day-to-day work that happens in Plate Analytics?
Yeah, good question. So Plaid Analytics helps universities, colleges, and governments who are interested in working more effectively with data related to education. And so we help with data and analytics solutions, whether that's building, say, a custom data warehouse designed for the right kind of reporting that they need to do, or things like Tableau dashboards and analytics built on top of that so that people can make better decisions more quickly and more easily. We also do business process improvement, so helping institutions move forward with new kinds of technology so they can repurpose the people that work for them rather than being a translator between different machines. The people can actually serve their students, which is what they signed up for when they got the job in the first place. We also do training and workshops. So basically help universities, colleges, and governments work with data.
Yeah, because your degree is something which is more of an cliche to the data science world because it's all MBA. Nobody cares about how you build machines in MBA because you are trying to get the value for a machine. Because I always say this, MBAs don't have to build a machine. They need to learn how to get the value for a machine because that's what makes a proper MBA graduate. So now you had a job, you left the job and you became full time for Plate Analytics. So what drove you to make that decision of leaving a job and just putting that 100% of yours in the Plate Analytics?
So there were probably two really big motivators to that. So the first one, which was the motivator for launching the company, was this insight that at the time, at least, many post-secondary institutions in the Canadian market, which was where we started, didn't have large teams of data scientists. In fact, the role data scientist wasn't really a thing in 2016, at least in higher education, typically. So one of the motivators was to be able to help institutions across the country and later across the world be able to work effectively with data. And what I found by working within the institution is that, with the exception of the biggest institutions, not many of them were able to have a large enough team to be able to do this effectively. So we thought there's an opportunity here for an outside set of independent experts to help you set up your data pipeline, to help you set up the decision-making shop that goes with it, or to augment what you already have so that you're able to move forward to the next generation of technologies and leverage them. So that was a big motivator for us, was how could we help as many universities and colleges as possible by creating a different model than what was typical at the time. So that was the big motivator behind the company. In terms of the specific question of why I chose to leave my day job, for me and my co-founder, Pat, this was a very obvious ethical choice for us. So we felt that we couldn't reasonably consult to, say, the competition when we worked full-time for, in my case, the University of British Columbia and his Simon Fraser University. It just didn't feel right to us. So for us, it was a no-brainer. This was what we had to do if we wanted to start a company. We learned much later that this was actually a real competitive advantage for us in a way that we hadn't really appreciated at the time that we decided to leave our day jobs. Being an independent expert is actually hugely valuable because we're not tied to a specific organization. We can provide independent advice, and we can we can be placed onto projects that are highly confidential in nature because there isn't a risk of us going and talking to our employer about it, intentionally or otherwise. So for us, it was the ethical high road. That's why we left to become independent. But it turns out it's created a really interesting niche for us because a lot of consultants in this space have day jobs in institutions. And so they're not seen as being the same level of impartial as what we and a few others are in the space.
You know, how do you choose a right teammate for your job or anything related to a startup? Of course, there are first time entrepreneurs who really are, okay, I need a proper team. How to choose it? What's the factor that you look in a person? And like, what really makes a person good enough to work in a startup? Of course, when you see, I've worked in startups and I've seen how agile startup is. It's like 10 commits per person. You will be having feedbacks like in like a lightning speed. You can never keep track of how many commits you are going to see in a day because it's unpredictable. What's that hustle that you need to put in order to work in a startup, a successful startup like yours?
Yeah, so it's definitely something different. So in terms of some skill sets, in terms of thinking of your initial team, so my first teammate was a co-founder, and this is a relatively common model, but some people choose to go it alone as well. So the first part I'll talk about is having a co-founder. What I would say based on my own experience is that having a co-founder who has some complementary skills to you and some skills that are different from you can help make for a stronger company. What I would think are really important in terms of characteristics of a co-founder. Number one, it absolutely has to be somebody that you trust with your life, because the reality for most people who found a startup is their life savings and a whole bunch of their future is tied up entirely in this one little company that statistics say is not very likely to make it. So having somebody that you trust in every possible way, including with your life savings, is hugely important. The other one is, I'd say, you need to have really open communication between you and your co-founders. So being unafraid to say, I don't like how this is going, or I think we should approach this differently, or this idea is actually amazing, we should really roll with this. Being able to say that freely and openly without offending people and being able to move forward with that, I think is really important. So definitely somebody that you trust, somebody that you can communicate with, and somebody who can help you build something together. So in that third instance, they need to buy into the same vision that you do. And there's always some give and take on this with co-founders, right? That's why you have a team. But ultimately, you should both have a vision for where you're going, and it should be in full alignment. And this brings me to my next point. So in terms of the rest of your team, surrounding yourselves with bright, talented people who are motivated by the vision that you have and motivated by their role contributing to it to make it a reality is hugely important. So hiring intelligent people, I find in startups, people who are self-motivated can be really good as long as they're well aligned with the vision. Because oftentimes in startups, you don't know what's coming next, right? Yeah, like you talked about, Vishwas, with the agile, you're just trying to plan for as near into the future as you can realistically see, but with a long-term vision of where you're trying to go. But you don't necessarily know all the steps in between here and there. You're learning them as you go. So somebody who can thrive in that environment often is somebody who has some level of self-motivation, who can say, okay, I see this problem. Here's a few ways that we can get to it. And oftentimes, others in the startup will be so focused on a similar kind of thing themselves that they might not have even had a chance to consider the problem that you're considering. And then when you tell them, you can learn from them, they can learn from you. It's a really good fit. Probably the other one, and I think this holds true for founders and employees, is you need to have some appetite for risk if you're going to work in a startup. And depending on the startup, there'll be more or less risk to it. But at the end of the day, this is not a job where you get a steady paycheck every second week and everything just flows and it'll be that way forever. This is a job that you probably will get paid every second week if you're doing things well, particularly if you're an employee, but less so if you're an owner. but that ultimately you have a chance to build a dream here. And so it's inherently less stable, but it provides huge growth opportunities. And so you can turn this into something that has a paycheck every second week. And by the way, for those considering founding a business, making sure you have enough revenue so that you can pay your team and yourselves is hugely important. But it's a very different paradigm than, say, working in a desk job for the government where you know you're going to get paid every second week. Being an owner is really different than that. Yeah, and so surround yourselves with smart people who want to take initiative and who are okay with the ambiguity that sometimes comes along with being a small business, where you may have to pivot multiple times in a month as you learn where your ideal fit is with that customer that you want to work with the market that wants to hire you, and with the things that you're good at.
Yeah, you are absolutely true, because it's not like how startups work. Startups might just fall in a day, because I've seen startups which were doing pretty good and are nowhere today. I worked in startups, and I still don't know whether those startups are existing because of the wrong people where they choose from. They think that people coming from an institution which is like superior to anything can give you a good hand in running a startup, but it turns out to be a worst decision that they have ever made. That's true, because it's not about your alma mater, it's all about your actual hustle that you put in order to get the work. It's all about that commitment, it's all about that how focused are you in order to get your team to the right path, because it's not a win-win situation that you will be the boss and you will be everybody. It's about getting a bright and a good leader in a company. That's true. But we saw how Google came out with lot and lot of products which were based on AI algorithms and computation. you know of course, it started as a software based company which used to just give a search engine, but now it's everything. Probably there is no company which is not dependent on Google, and there's no reason that Google is not dependent on the other companies, because they need to run ads on the other people's website also, right? So it's all dependent. Of course, the infrastructure is something which is dependent. Of course, like we saw how cloud really changed the game, and now we are seeing how microservices are changing the game. So it's all that baby steps that you take in, and it turns out into something humongous, just like an humongous machine which was supposed to do something and you programming it to do something else. Like, what do you feel that played analytics can do in a year ahead? What are your plans, and what can a startup be from no brainer people who just want to just quit their jobs, just just focus on the startup, to what are your future plans? Because you are more related to the data, which is more into education, government, university. So what are the plans that you have for played analytics for the year ahead?
Yeah, so it's funny to be almost 5 years into this and still think about the future in that way. We have a great deal of room to run to fulfill our mission to help universities and colleges be successful with data. So I think it's interesting that you bring up Google. There's one of the things about being a startup is that you can achieve anything you set out your mind to achieve. And executing on it is a different challenge. But in theory, if you have a good idea that the market wants and is willing to pay for, and that you can execute on really well, the sky is the limit. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about being an entrepreneur, is that there's no limitation on the ideas that I can have, as long as I can find people who find them valuable. And so a lot of effort needs to be put into being customer centric. And I think Google actually did this really well. It's a good example. I think they did it in a little bit more automated fashion than many companies do. But the basic idea is that they learned what their customers needed, and they built better and better versions of that over time. And so what started as search and morphed into AdWords and AdSense, and has later morphed into dozens of other kind of spin-off ideas that relate or don't terribly relate to Google. None of those, I think, would have been possible if Google didn't listen to the customers who needed them to fulfill that service. So Google came onto the internet at a time when information was starting to explode in terms of what was available on the internet. So it was no longer about searching and finding a scarce resource. It was now about finding among millions and millions of articles, which one was the most likely to help you solve the problem you were trying to solve. Or among millions of vendors, which vendor was the best placed to help you find the product you're looking for. And Google continued to iterate on that over and over and over again to make it better and better. And that's why there's one of the reasons why they're so successful today. So we're on a much smaller scale, right? Google's got hundreds of thousands of employees, if I'm not mistaken, certainly tens of thousands, and Plaid has 5. And so we're not quite there yet in terms of the Google scale, but maybe one day we will get there. But I do hope that there's some commonality. So one of the things we really try and do is understand what our customers need and where they're going. And so what we see is lots of pain points around the data process. Maybe it's there's information silos, different departments, different databases, some services in the cloud, some on campus, some are microservices, some are not, this kind of thing. That's a really common problem for people. It's overwhelming to try and find what you need. And it's really difficult to plug and play those pieces together for most institutions. So we're starting to see the rise of things like virtual or logical data models that kind of take out some of the difficulty in that process, so that a rank and file analyst is able to do their job of analyzing the data quickly and easily. It doesn't matter where the data lives, they can connect to it, they can get it, and they can do it securely and in a governed fashion. I think these kind of things are going to start to grow more and more. We're also seeing increased reporting requirements, if you will. So this might be for reasons of transparency, as in an institution would like to be more transparent with their public, or it might be a little bit by force where legislation has changed and now they have to be more transparent than what they used to be. In either case, they need data that is available and that can be shared with their constituents as quickly and easily as possible while being secure and transparent. So we think those things are going to grow as well. The other one that I'm really starting to see a lot of is on the governance side. So data governance in particular has been growing a lot. We think part of this is because the rise of using data to make decisions has helped reveal that there's some structural faults in terms of how many organizations put together their data systems. It's very difficult to combine information from, say, a finance system with information from a student housing system. Or a library system. It's just not that straightforward out of the box, but there's tools that can help you with this. So data integration tools go a long way. That logical data model goes a long way. There's also some business processes that can make your life easier, where you think more holistically about the inputs going into these systems. So data governance is growing in part because of those reasons, but in part because of legislation. So in Europe, it started with the GDPR. California, I think, was next out of the gate with some changes. In my own country, in Canada, the federal government is talking about some major overhauls to privacy legislation. These things are going to cause governance concerns to grow. And I think if we do it right, we can actually be successful at helping make our data better for making decisions, but actually more secure for our students or our faculty or our staff, whoever the data is about. There is a happy medium there, but it's going to take some work to actually get there. And so I think that area is going to grow as well.
Yeah, last time when we were recording, sorry for it, last time we didn't do the podcast round 2, right? Sorry for it. Last time when we were recording, you also told about you need to have a lawyer in your firm because you might run into something like lawsuits or something like that, because you need everybody in a startup. But do you really think so that learning entrepreneurship is something which is more of an unique skill that you just learn by doing, not by studying? And how did you learn your entrepreneurship skills? Because you last time when we were recording, you told about the lawyer that you need a right teammate. Because I thought you forgot to answer it in the question which we asked about the teammates and everybody, co-founder. So yeah, that's what I really wanted to convey. And how did you learn the entrepreneurship? Was it a hard way that you just wanted to learn, or is it just the more of a theoretical part that we do in the academic world?
Yeah, so I'll definitely chime in on that in addition to your internal team, you want to have a suite of experts in their appropriate disciplines. So every company needs a lawyer and an accountant at minimum, and probably a bookkeeper to make your life easier, because you as the entrepreneur, probably shouldn't be doing all of the manual data entry for that purpose. There's people who are really good at that. You're probably not one of them. And your time would be better spent crafting out your vision and finding the kinds of customers who you believe exist in the world for your idea, or learning from them that your idea needs some refinement in order to be valid. So definitely surround your internal team with an external team of experts in the appropriate disciplines to help you be successful. And don't be afraid to kind of onboard somebody who has a set of skills that you don't have, because it's amazing how much bandwidth that can free up for you to be successful in the things that you're really good at. So that's definitely worth bringing up. Thank you for pointing that one out, Vishwas. In terms of entrepreneurship, I wouldn't say I ever intended to become an entrepreneur. This happened because of a series of circumstances that worked out to bring me here today. So I would say that I learned some of it in school. So doing the MBA was very helpful to me, in particular because it taught me some of the basics that I would need in order to run a company. So that was oversight of accounting, understanding of financial. So in terms of nature versus nurture for entrepreneurship, can you learn this or is it ingrained? I'd say both are possible. In terms of what you can learn in school, a program like an MBA can really help you with some of the core building blocks around starting a business. So for me, the biggest pieces that I took away from that were knowing enough about accounting to be able to supervise my team of accounting related professionals, whether that's accountants or bookkeepers, et cetera. Knowing enough about financial models so that I could plan out what the future of the company would look like. In particular, as a small business, cash flow really matters, right? And this matters when it's just the founders, it matters in one way, where it's important, but you can kind of go, oh, well, in a few months, it'll be fine. It's very different once you have employees who are not owners and they need to be paid every 2 weeks or twice a month or whatever the standard is in your country. Not only from an ethical perspective, but legally, they have to be paid on time. And so that introduces a whole other series of events where being able to understand financial modeling and in particular cash flow is really important. So the MBA helped me learn that. But probably the biggest thing I would say from the MBA is around the idea of the network. So for, call it a year to 2 years, depending on your program, you're surrounded by other people who have ideas about how the world could be made a better place. And so you're constantly talking about what it turns out are actually really good ideas for businesses. And so a program like that really helps. It also taught me a lot about understanding my own tolerance for risk. And that was a combination of classwork and talking with my classmates. So naturally, I'm a little bit risk averse. And so to be able to start a business and leave my good job behind, I had to be able to tell myself, okay, well, what kind of a mark would I want to make over 3 years or 5 years? What would that look like? And then how do I get there so I can be satisfied I made the right choice? Other people are a little more risk-taking by nature. They'll just say, well, the return on this is greater than the return on staying where I am, so therefore I'm going to do it, no problem. And some people take it a little more convincing. So those things I would say can be learned in school, or at least the starting points on them. The things that I think are a little harder to learn in school are how to identify the right customer for your business and how to learn from them so that you can make better products designed not just for that customer, but for other people who have similar desires and aspirations, right? So how do we make somebody more successful with working with data and education is ours. And we constantly talk to our customers to try and find out, like, what is painful about this or what is missing from this, right? We built you this thing, but is it working the way that you thought? Or is there a gap here somewhere? How can we help make this better as we go forward? Is a conversation we have frequently. So I think those things are harder to learn in school because they come from real customers. And you need to have a relationship of trust with those customers in order to get them to open up to talk about what their pain points are. So it's not like a sales pitch. It's more you're learning from each other. And then when they reveal a pain point, maybe I've experienced that before and say, hey, have you tried this? Even if that's not something that my business does, it might help them be successful. And that's really important in your business to customer relationship, especially. So those pieces I think are a little harder. And learning to refine your ideas over time, I think takes skill and practice. And sometimes doing it the wrong way and then changing it again and learning from it. There's lots of those moments too. But the end goal is let's try and get a little bit better every single day at what we do to help our customers be successful.
Yeah, all these just boils down to your balance sheet. It doesn't matter whether you are from the best of the best, funded through any of the venture capitalists or something. It's all your hard work and how you show it in a balance sheet. That's true, because how companies work is based on how your balance sheet is. You know, we we take the consideration of a companies through beta which they have in the present time, and also how their balance sheet is being portrayed in the world. That's what we care about. So I just want to ask you this one question, where what's the win-win move for making a sustainable startup to have a bright idea and execute it? Because of course there are millions of people who want to see their first $1 billion, but nobody is worth every dime of it because they are not ready to put in that work. They're not ready to take in that risk actually. Because I have seen startups which have planned very good, but like fail to hire good people, fail to make a sustainable move, fail to make a sustainable decision, because everybody wants to see that first $1 billion very early. So what's the win-win sustainable move to make a startup which is more sustainable and also a stand-apart startup?
Mm. Yeah, so building a successful startup is tricky, and I think I've still got a ways to go before I'm at that point. But we're almost 5 years, so we've definitely done a few things right along the way. There's a book called The Lean Startup that I think many of your audience have probably heard of, and if they haven't, it's a good read if you're thinking about starting a business. And the reason why I suggest something like The Lean Startup or a series of other topics related to agile and lean is because the basic impetus here is get your idea to the point that somebody can understand what it is, and then talk to them about it and learn from them how well that idea that you have in your mind aligns with the problem that they're trying to solve. Because you could have the best business idea in the world or the best product in the world, but if nobody knows about it and nobody becomes more successful at what they're trying to achieve with it, nobody's going to care. Your idea is not going to make it. So learn early, learn often. I think for me, one of the things that I really struggle with is I want everything I do to be my best work. And I think many of us who've gone through the schooling system are accustomed to this way of thinking. And I think that's important. But I also think that my very best work, if I'm not careful, may not align with what my client needs in order for them to achieve the goals that they have, the whole reason why they hired me or bought my product. And so it could be great, but if it doesn't solve their problem, it's not gonna work. So I would say be really cautious about trying to get your idea 100% perfect before you show it to somebody from outside your company. Now, depending on your idea, there are some risks to this. So be really careful with ideas that you consider hugely proprietary, that maybe are world changing, that you should probably have patented before you talk too far outside your bubble. But in general, talking to real customers or potential customers to learn what challenges they're grappling with will make your idea better. So I think that's really important. The other one is that this is particularly true of entrepreneurs, but I think everyone over the last, almost a year to the day, has experienced what it's like when suddenly everything changes. And so there's a book by Nicholas Nassim Taleb called The Black Swan. And it talks about events that don't come around very often, things that are very hard to predict, and particularly are hard to predict when they will occur. So an example of this in our current paradigm is it was pretty obvious that at some point the world would have a pandemic. The problem was we didn't know what the pandemic would be or when it would happen. And so it's actually really hard to plan for that kind of ambiguity. But as a small business, especially, or a new business, that kind of ambiguity can be your moment to shine, or it can be the end of you. So most businesses, including ours, had noticeable changes in customer behavior pre and post pandemic. Many businesses became more successful delivering more things online, and we're one of those examples. But there were other ways to handle it as well. So one of the things about being an entrepreneur is sometimes you need to drop whatever you're doing in order to be able to pivot into what is needed now. And there's a delicate balance here where you want to balance the now with the long-term future, but sometimes the now can actually build into that long-term future too. So for us, we're excited to be able to deliver more online offerings because it means we can spend more time with our families, and our clients can get can have their services spaced out more effectively. So rather than flying us across the country to do a training session in 2 days, we can split it up over a number of weeks so that trainees have a chance to practice the skills they're learning. We think this is a win-win, although we miss seeing people in person. I will say that much. It's definitely a weird experience, but being able to adapt when the world around you changes is really important for a small business. And I guess the last thing I would say, just to continue on that line of perfection can be really challenging, is I see a lot of projects that people try to plan from beginning to end, and then they fall behind their initial schedule. And this is oftentimes, delays on their own part or delays on the part of their customer, or new needs emerge that they hadn't considered in their previous plan. So while I think an overall plan is really important, I think constantly revisiting it will help make you successful because needs change over time as you uncover new questions.
Yeah, it's new skill set every day. As you told, you need to just go back, just revise on whatever you know or something, because every day it's going to be new change, because it's step by step, it's a whole new transformation that we are seeing in the technology. It's like one day when we just see something, the other day somebody might be coming up with something which is more advanced. Every day keeping track of archive is also very difficult, because every day archive hosts close to around 50 plus papers, that's for sure. Because somewhere I had heard they even do more, but like whatever I focus on, I think probably I feel like there is lot and lot of publications coming out. Of course there is lot and lot of new techniques that are evolving day by day. But I wanted to ask you this one question where it's very related to the skills. Like, I just want to directly ask you, what are those key skills that a data scientist need today, and how to keep up with this pace of change that we are seeing, but that we are just seeing in everyday life? And also, I just want you to give some example of the projects which really shaped you as a data scientist. Of course, you were an MBA grad, and of course, your MBA was not kind of an MBA, but it's a kind of an program where you choose very keen on whatever you had that requirement for. So of course we'll be discussing in the future, but like I just want you to give the key skills that is required for today's data scientist, and what are all those projects that really shaped you as a data scientist today.
All right. Yeah. So data science is a really interesting profession to me. I will say that I am not an advanced data scientist, but that I help people be successful with using data. So I think data science is a really, really broad term. It can mean different things to different people. But there are some common threads that I see an awful lot. So ones that I think would be really beneficial for aspiring data scientists or aspiring data professionals to continue to hone their craft. As much as for a long time we saw articles saying it would be gone in the near term, being able to access data through SQL is still a hugely important skill, whether you're an advanced data scientist who mostly builds models, or whether you're a report builder who mostly builds things that can be consumed by others. Being able to get that data is really important because most organizations in the world still rely on relational data management systems for the core of lots of their data. The next one that I would say, though, it has really been growing in the last 5 years, similar to what Vishwas talked about earlier with the growth of microsystems, is being able to access data through cloud platforms. So in most cases, this means being able to handle using an application programming interface or API to request data. It's in a different form than what you would get from a relational database. Right? As a general rule, cloud data comes in small packages. So you want to know something about customer payments, as an example. You might request that from your accounting firm's API, and you could get one payment at a time or a batch of them, but it's structured very differently than what you would get from a relational database system. And so learning how to interact with those things will really help. And then leading into that part is cloud systems are growing, right? So we see microservices from Amazon Web Services and Google and Microsoft and a whole bunch of others. I don't think these things are going away any day soon. And so being able to understand how microservices are different than fully built platforms that you've made yourself, for example, knowing how to interact with those and when to leverage them is something that I think is going to continue to grow. What I also think will change with the cloud providers as more and more jurisdictions bring in more stringent privacy requirements is that there will be an explosion in regionality of these different services. And so in my case, Amazon and Microsoft have Canadian data centers for most of their services. This is not true of some of the other cloud providers. And so for us, because of the customer base that we work with in a regulated industry, we have to go with Amazon or Microsoft because they're the only ones that are compliant, which means they're the only ones that can make sure that we are compliant when we offer these services. So I think that kind of problem is going to continue to compound, where I think it'll be in the benefit of the customer or the software builder, where you'll actually be able to better select what region your data lives in to best protect your customers and align with the set of rules that's in place in your jurisdiction. I think it will get trickier if you have a global audience and you're going to have to really carefully decide your strategy on where your global audience's data is stored and processed and viewed, because I think different legislation will have different rules for that. And so it's going to be an increasing area of strategy. The other skills that I think are really helpful for a data scientist are actually what we would traditionally call soft skills. So being able to talk to, if you're an independent business, being able to talk to your customer. If you work for somebody else, it's being able to talk to your internal stakeholders. So not everybody that you interact with is going to be an expert in data. So working with them to understand the business requirement of what they need, and you helping bring in the technology and the data component. If you work together effectively, you will both achieve more, because as a data scientist, you'll no longer be building models that nobody looks at and never make it to production. You'll be making something that your customers or internal clients are going to be demanding makes it into production, because it will make their life easier, or it'll help them sell more, or it will increase transparency. Whatever your goal is, if you work with the customer of your data product, you will be more successful than if you work alone. So I think those skills are really important too.
But what about the projects that really shaped you as a data scientist? I just need those specific ones, because last time when we were recording, you talked about Tableau, Power BI. Of course, there are problems which can't be solved from either of these tools. Also, you need to take something else, or else one tool might not be feasible in getting you the right solution, where you have to choose the other tool. So what are all those things, that permutation and combination of working with the tools, and any specific problem statement that you really solved and you felt like this is not all about the tools, it's all about me as a data scientist?
Right. Okay. So in terms of kind of some of the problems that got me started on this trajectory. So the thing that got me into data was, at the time I worked for a university, and specifically for an academic program. I was an advisor and recruiter, and we grew that program threefold in 4 years, which sounds really good until you realize that government funding doesn't actually keep up with that kind of growth. It takes a few more years to catch up, essentially. And so we had this problem. We suddenly had 1,200 students, but only enough teachers for, call it 500 of them, or maybe 600. So we had a problem. I fell into data because of this problem. So this is when I discovered Tableau. So that was in like 2006, 2007 range, when Tableau was a very, very young company. And I thought that this tool could help me understand not necessarily who the students were, but how many students were in, say, first year or second year, how many students needed this course, and what we could do about it in terms of hiring instructors. So that was hugely influential on my ability to start my data career. I also read the book Competing on Analytics, which helped open my eyes to what was possible beyond what I knew at that point in time. So it's a really good read, and there's been a more recent update to talk about some of the modern stuff as well. So those things were kind of the starting points, and Tableau has been a big, big part of my career. So I definitely have a soft spot for it. It's helped me solve many, many problems over the years. This being said, I think for a successful data scientist, Having the skills with a visualization tool like Tableau is important, and I should have mentioned that in the previous question. But I also think being able to work with more than one tool set is really helpful. So in my case, I've learned Python more recently in my career, and I now use it to solve particular types of challenges by choice rather than by force, which I feel is a reflection that I've actually learned something over the last few years. So that's nice. And I don't think a specific tool is particularly important. So in terms of tool sets for aspiring data scientists, in my own career, when I got started in data, it was in large part because I worked for a university. We grew the academic program I worked for about threefold in 4 years, which is not so great when you work for the government because the money doesn't keep up. So suddenly we had all these students and nobody to teach them. So I got Tableau in 2006, 2007 to help understand that problem. It was the first time that we could see where our students were in the system and what courses did they need. And we could do it so quickly and so easily compared to anything else that we'd tried. That was an example of taking a risk on a new tool because you think it has potential and then realizing that potential. I would say the same with other tool sets. So in my own case, I now use Python by choice because it has a better way to solve a lot of problems than some other tools that I use. And so the fact I use it by choice suggests I've learned a lot, because I can definitely say 2-3 years ago, it wouldn't have been my first choice because I just wasn't at that level yet. So being able to learn on an ongoing basis is hugely important. The specific tools matter less, but what does matter is your ability to try out different kinds of tools to see if they'll help you solve problems. I wouldn't say you should use a new tool for every single problem you face because you'll never become good at any of those tools. But would I say that you should only have one tool that you use? Probably not. I think there's a balance in between those two things. So being willing to try some new things and experiment with them and build your skills in them are really important. And more generally, just being able to learn all the time is a hugely important skill for an entrepreneur, because ideally you phased out or automated everything that you used to do a year ago so you can focus on these new things. And so I think ongoing learning is really important. Did that answer the question, Vishwas, or is there more?
Yeah, like it's enough because it's not about the projects that you can talk, but it's all about that requirement that you actually faced, as a startup. There will be a huge shift. It's like when you started the startup, you'll be happy because everybody will be happy that you started your own company, but it's not the same. It's not the same journey, because there are days where you feel like, okay, I should stop this. I should just wrap it up, and I should just go back to my day job. And like, when the requirements change, when the number, it's all about the number. When the number is less, you will be, okay, it might not be working out for a while. If the number is high, you will be saying, yes, of course, yeah, it answered the question. So of course, now you have done an MBA, and it's the season where all the MBA grads are getting their mindsets done, and they are getting ready for writing the entrance exam and everything. So I just want you to give that some of the insights that really help you shape from being an MBA to being a data scientist, building a startup, because we never know, somebody who might be seeing this podcast today, tomorrow, or any day can be motivated, because most of the people are not satisfied because they are doing an MBA, because it might be from their pressure from their peers or else from their family, a lot of things. Like, how did MBA help you get shaped as a data scientist, or whoever that you are today? It can be an entrepreneur that you are, it can be a data scientist, it can be a good leader that you are today. And do you really recommend people, or else which people should really take up MBA in order to get themselves that motivation of being what an MBA is required for today's world? Of course, 10 years before, MBA had a different market value, because as soon as you do an MBA, you're sure to get a job, but it's not the same thing. It's a whole new different level of complexity when it comes to an MBA. What are your thoughts on MBA?
Yeah, so my thoughts on an MBA program are that for me, it was a really valuable learning experience. So for me, it was definitely worthwhile. And one of the reasons why the MBA program that I participated in was worthwhile is that it wasn't actually a standard MBA program. It was differentiated, which when you do an MBA, you'll learn more about differentiation as well, incidentally. But in my case, my MBA program focused on management of technology. And so we focused on how tech companies were successful, what strategies they used, different kinds of pricing models, subscription versus one-time fee, that kind of stuff. We focused on those kind of problems in the tech space. So it was a little bit different than your standard MBA. For me, that was really valuable, and it brought me together who could help me get to my next level. So for me, it was definitely worthwhile. One thing I will say, though, is that, as you mentioned, Vishwas, the MBA is not the golden ticket it once was, right? Just getting one is not going to double your salary, unfortunately. You've got to do something to make yourself stand out relative to others. So having an MBA is nice, but showing a company how the combination of skills that you have from what you did previously plus your MBA can help them be more successful, that's really what's going to start making the difference and really showing them that value. The other thing I'll mention is that in the time since I've done my MBA, there has been an explosion of master's degrees related to data science or big data or business analytics or a number of others that all use those same kind of buzzwords, but use them in different orders and ways. Some of these may be worth considering. So if you're really aspiring to be a data scientist, you could debate whether an analytics master's or a business master's is the best fit for you. And I think that depends on the university and the program, the kinds of things that they're teaching, and what the outcomes are for the program. So I'd encourage you to do the research on those things rather than just assume that a specific program is the best fit for you. And because it may not be based on name. There might be an MBA that sounds traditional that is super innovative and world-changing. And there might be an analytics master's that is the same. And so finding the right balance for you, I think, is really important. I would say that the MBA is a good way to level up what you've done. So I think this is true of all masters to a certain extent. But when we did our MBA classes, we often called this big people school because there was nobody to force us to come to class or to submit our assignments on time or to work collaboratively with our teammates on team projects, that kind of stuff. It's just not that kind of a place. So if you don't want to put in the effort, you're just not going to make it. Like, it's really that simple. There's no hard feelings, but it's important to know that going in, right? Nobody's going to force you to be successful with this. You're going to have to put in the hard work, and so are your teammates. And so I think that's probably the other thing that for some people is a rude awakening from their undergraduate degree, is learning that you will get out of this what you put into it, and you have to put in effort.
Oh, your journey into data management and data science is something which is more unique because you met a lot of people in your MBA and your degree was something. And you also talked about there are different problems that you have faced during doing an MBA or something. Of course, last time when we were recording, you also gave they have to search for different MBAs. What's your thought on people who really want to do an MBA? That's also should have been covered.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I would say if you'd really like to do an MBA, it is definitely worth exploring. There's multiple different models of it. And depending on your needs, some might be a better fit for you than others. So here's a few examples, but know that there's dozens and dozens of different models of MBAs. So the ones that I see most commonly is there's a full-time MBA, and it usually takes about a year. There's a part-time MBA, and it usually takes about 2 years. So the full-time one, you pretty much have to quit your job to be able to do, so you have the time to do it. The part-time ones are generally designed for you to keep your job during that time and go to class in the evenings and occasionally on weekends. There's also mixed models. And so maybe it's you do some of it online, you do some of it face-to-face when the world normalizes again. There's also kind of loosely like intensive models. So you'll go to another city typically, and you'll go there for 2 weeks or something. And in that 2 weeks, you will learn an awful lot. And then you work online in between. And there's also fully online programs. So all those different models may align well with your learning style, and you want to look into the differences between those. And in terms of the subject matter for an MBA, there's different ways of teaching it as well. So we see a bit of a divide between what you could call the traditional teaching method, where you have an instructor at the front of the room and they're providing a lecture and you're taking notes. The business school I went to at Simon Fraser University, they taught using the case method. And this is pretty common for MBA schools. So rather than having an instructor at the front of the room giving a lecture, you get a case about a particular company or organization, and you work with your team to understand that case and present it back to the class. And the instructor is there more as a facilitator to help guide the conversation than necessarily to lecture you, though they have tons of knowledge that they contribute in this way as well. But it's a very different learning model. And for me, it was better, but I don't know if this is true for everybody. So looking into how they teach their courses is a good thing. And if it's available, and most business schools have something like it, if you can sit in on a class virtually or in person when that comes back, and actually be in a real classroom to learn what is that class like, that will go a long way to helping you understand it. And then the last thing I would say in terms of considering an MBA is you'd be amazed at how open people are to talking about their experience. So you could ask somebody with an MBA, preferably somebody who's graduated recently so they remember it, what their thoughts were on the experience and would they recommend it or not. Lots of people are open to that conversation. So it's worth reaching out sometimes to ask people in your network or a little bit beyond it if they'd be willing to talk about their experience with you, because that's more personal than a marketing campaign, those kind of things. So yeah, learning more about what options are out there and best aligning those with what your needs are in terms of your learning environment and your career aspirations, I would say is a good way to help identify MBA schools, because there's lots of them.
Yeah, looking back at whatever you have learned, what did you really learn from an MBA degree? Like, is it about anything and everything about data science, or else is it about anything and everything that you should have had learned quite before, but you just had a degree span of time so that you started exploring more about you? What was MBA all about?
So this is where I start to feel a little bit old. So when I did my MBA, data science was just starting to emerge as a career track. So my MBA didn't have much in the way of data science in it. It had some technology, some data, but for the most part, it was too new. So I don't know that that the MBA will align perfectly with the skill sets of tomorrow every time, but it will teach you a variety of core building blocks that will help you. So in my own case, having the knowledge to be a business owner, which means being able to supervise, accountants and financial strategy and teammates, was important. Having the ability to be an entrepreneur. So in my case, this was understanding the value chain, understanding price models, thinking through how my company could differentiate its offerings from others that are in a similar space so that we're not competing head on, but so that it's really obvious to our customers. Plaid is the very best at helping us build data systems that help us be able to do reporting and make decisions better, versus this other group is maybe versus this other group is much better at delivering in-person surveys or understanding employee engagement. Those are things that Plaid doesn't do particularly well, right? So knowing that they should go to this other group for that kind of work, but to us when it comes to data structures, reporting, analytics, that kind of thing, understanding how to do differentiation was a big skill I picked up in the MBA. And I've got lots of learning to continue to do on that, but that was important. And then the other one for me personally was around my tolerance for risk. So understanding how to measure that and understanding what it would take to get me to take a risk that is much larger than what I would traditionally take, so that I could tell myself how I would get there and set appropriate goals. I think that was really important too.
Yeah. When you also see your alma mater, it's like MBA in 2006 and you have applied analytics at 2016. Of course, your MBA is in a time which is like the Stone Age time of data science, which was never called as data science. Of course, I did podcast with Tom Ives. I think probably the person who has seen the world of data science and deep learning grow in his lifetime. I think probably everything that he talks is very close to data science, but it's just like the physics of data science. Like probably he has seen the vacuum tube era of the data science. I think I can say that because of course when I came in 2017, Facebook had a meme material which said the AI which is being developed by Facebook was conversing with its own language. I don't know whether it was their attempt to build an AGI or something. Yeah, everything has its own downfalls, and now they are also one of the top-notch company which is working on AGI, building an AGI. Of course, no company has built it, but they are trying to do it. But what was your journey from having an MBA in the Stone Age era of the data science and opening a startup in a time where it started to make some sort of a disruption? When you were doing MBA, I was in class one, 2006. That was my class one. Yeah, class one. So it's like we have a lot and lot of gap in our mindsets, because when people start, it's all about how they have been educated from the universities. That's what really matters to some people. But like, what's that way in which you started educating yourself? What's your journey altogether, starting from your MBA to the startup? And how many people did you meet? What and all really happened after MBA, before MBA, and what was your mindset altogether?
Yeah, so my MBA program was actually pretty small. I think our cohort was around 20, give or take. And occasionally we would be paired up with the group that was the year ahead of us. So we'd occasionally grow to 40 for certain classes. So it was small, but very tight knit. So I think I made a strong set of connections through this. And I think most MBA programs, the connections you make is really important. So I actually graduated from the MBA in 2015. So not quite as old as you were thinking, but my undergrad was 2006. So it's definitely the right comparison, that I am not quite as young as I once was. So after the MBA, I worked at the University of British Columbia, which is in Vancouver, Canada. I was a senior planning analyst. So I did admissions data warehousing and enrollment related reporting. And it was a really good job. I worked with an awesome team. I had a great boss. And then this conversation came up with the guy who's now my co-founder. And we said, like, since we stopped working together a couple of years ago, we've inadvertently kind of watered down the talent pool. So now we don't have enough strength to be saying you should make decisions with data, because it's really one of us often making this argument. And two voices were actually better than one for that purpose. And so it all started from that. We had originally intended to build some pretty major software products. And I think we had some good ideas, but we were very naive. And so we had a chance to meet with a guy who was a VP at a tech company, who we knew through our network. And we told him about our ideas, and the train was mostly out of the station at this point. We had our ideas figured out. We had a business plan created. We were ready to quit our jobs. And we just happened to meet with this guy about a month before all of that was set to take place. And we told him about our ideas, and he sat there for a second. He says, okay, so it sounds to me like lots of people have told you the positive side of your ideas, and that there's a need for this, and that you guys are smart and capable and you'll be able to figure it out. So let's park all that. You've heard that already. I'm going to tell you all of the other side of the equation. And he told us about how two guys from Vancouver who've never founded a business before would probably really struggle to get major funding to be able to hire software developers for the kind of enterprise product we had dreamed up. And he said, even if we could manage to get that, which is really unlikely given our lack of experience creating a successful business, we'd then get to the marketplace and we would discover that there is in fact only a small number of players in this space, and that there's a huge barrier to entry, and that we're probably not going to take on the likes of Fortune 500 companies directly, because we won't be able to afford to fight them. And it was a really difficult conversation at the time, because we'd spent months perfecting our idea and getting ready to go with this. And this guy basically tore it all apart in the matter of half an hour. And then at the end of it, he said, so I know this was pretty harsh to hear, but I'm telling you this because I don't want you to go bankrupt in 6 months. You probably won't make it with that idea. So what I have heard from you is that you've got a unique set of skills that nobody else in the consulting space has. The big accounting companies like Deloitte or KPMG, they typically can't hire people like you with this deep subject expertise. So have you ever considered starting as a consultant? And if you did that, you can afford to start as a consultant because the barrier to entry is low. You make a name for yourself, you build a successful company, you might really love it, frankly. But if you want to get towards a product eventually, you then have a reputation, you have a company that's successful, and you have a fleet of customers who've seen that you can do things. He said, and by then you'll have learned what they really need rather than what you think they need, which is the stage that you're at now. So we actually started with consulting in large part because of that conversation. And sure enough, almost 5 years later, we've got a fleet of customers. We understand what their challenges are and what their needs are. And if we want to make software, we have the ability to do that because now we understand our customer. And I don't think that would have been true 5 years ago. So I really thank that person for helping make this journey possible the way it was. Once we launched the company, we went into it headlong. So as mentioned, we quit our day jobs and we dove straight into this. It took a little while to get enough revenue to be able to move forward the way we wanted to, but we actually managed to get our first customer just before we had left our day jobs. It was signed, I think, a week before I left my job at UBC. And so having that first customer as an entrepreneur is a huge relief, right? Even if it's a small customer, getting the first one says, there is some market traction for the ideas that you have. Now you have to build that. And so we built upon that. And it's been almost 5 years now. It'll be 5 years in June. And in that time, we've expanded our team. We've expanded our presence across North America. We still have to expand across the world. That's coming. But we've really helped a lot of educational institutions move forward using data. And we've been so impressed at how successful they have become. We've given them some of the tools and some of the tricks of the trade, and they have taken it and they've run with it. They've done amazing things. And so it's been a really neat journey to be a part of. That's basically what happened following the MBA.
But why there was analytics in higher education? Like you took your degree, which is like very close to that. Why was there an analytics in higher education?
Right. So this is actually an important point for aspiring founders as well. So the reason we chose education is because we knew it really well. And we felt we knew it better than most other people. So what we found at the time is that there's lots of consultants out there that know education strategy, loosely speaking. And there were lots of consultants that know data architectures and data warehousing and that sort of stuff. But it was pretty rare to find consultants that did both of those things. And so we were able to fit into that gap in between where we understood what it was like to be an admissions officer deciding whether a student gets to come to campus or not. We understood what it was like to grow an academic program, et cetera, et cetera. But we were total data nerds as well. And so we could speak both those languages. We felt that gave us a niche that nobody else was really playing in. And so we chose education because it's where our expertise was and it's where our network was. It also happened to be one of the things that we're most passionate about. So we're firm believers that education opens doors for people, and we try and do our part with that. Like I'm a mentor through the business school, and we hire interns or co-op students from time to time, and new graduates, that kind of thing. It's a small piece we can do to give back a little bit too. But for us, the discipline of education really, really matters. It has a public good component to it where people who go through education can have a transformative life experience. What they do after that education can look very different than what they would have done if they didn't pursue that education. It's not to say it's perfect for everybody, and it definitely takes some hard work. But to us, that idea that we're helping to improve people's lives one step at a time, that really mattered. So that's why we chose education in large part.
Yeah, there are a lot of challenges. There are a lot of differences in working with education data. But do you have any suggestion to the student or the people who are willing to begin their career using education data?
Yeah. So I'd say having some example projects that you can show an employer that relate to the kind of discipline that they're in is really important. So in our case, it's education, but maybe it's finance or healthcare. What I would say is try and find some portfolio pieces that you can build up that really showcase your talents, right? So maybe that's something like Tableau, or maybe it's Python, or maybe it's R, or a number of other things. It doesn't matter too much what it is as what it shows. So show an employer that you can join their organization and create immediate value for them because you have some skills coming in. Even though you're going to learn a lot on the job as well, having that is really important. So I think a portfolio can help differentiate you from other candidates. I'd say that's a big one. Always being willing to learn is another big one. So the portfolio shows some of that already, but reading books or learning different skill sets through online courses or going back to school to brush up on something that either you've forgotten over the years or a skill that you want to pick up, those kind of things will help you stand out versus another candidate. Right. One of the things that I find often can be challenging for especially newer entrants to the job market is that every job requires experience. Right. So how do you get that if you haven't had the experience yet? Well, one of the ways to do that is to build up your portfolio and say, on my own time, I tried building this thing and it helped make a better decision about this. Those kind of things stand out to an employer. So I'd say those are important. And know that the odds of an employer finding somebody that has 100% of the things that they're looking for in the job description are practically zero. So don't eliminate yourself because you don't have everything. Do the best you can to show how you have most of what they're looking for and that your ability to learn and make a difference on their team will really help them in the long run. Those kind of things stand out too. And the other one is keep with it. I know over the last year, especially the job market for new grads has been really up and down depending on which part of the world you're in. So sometimes it takes longer than you would like, but keep trying. Introduce or reach out to other people in the industry. Maybe it's a specific industry, maybe it's a specific company. Talk to them, ask them if they'd be willing to have an information interview with you to learn more about how they got to where they are. This is good in a couple different ways. So information interviews help you meet people in the relevant industries, which is really important. It helps you learn what skills they really value, because sometimes the job descriptions that HR approves and what an employer really needs are not necessarily the same things. It signals that you're interested in this space and looking for work. And it may not be the person you talk to who's hiring, but they might know somebody who's going to be hiring. And the fact that you took the initiative to reach out and ask them some intelligent questions about their role means that they might bring your name up and say, hey, this person's looking and I really enjoyed my chat with them. Maybe you should have a conversation with them and see if they could help you. There's a lot of referral-based job hiring that happens. So having a wider network and showcasing your skills and interest really goes a long way with that.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you this question because we talked a lot on how shift in the mindset of the clients when it comes to the pandemic and everything. Of course, there are data science evangelists, data science manager, client side data scientists. There are different roles for in data science. Data science need not have to just be about pondering and seeing the data on your screen, just doing the CSV files or anything, but it's also about interacting with the clients. I just want to ask you this: how to make sure that you have an effective interaction with the clients? Because I know it's off the topic because we want to focus on more of an education data or something, but if an MBA graduate wants to do something similar to what you have done and he is in a company or else he has started his own company, how to effectively interact with a client? That's my question, because it's going to be the first step to get into business or to be the best piece of advice that you want to really take from you so that they can really interact good with their clients. What's that?
I think the biggest thing in terms of client interaction is a foundation of mutual respect. So when you come in as a consultant, you may have more knowledge of a particular topic than your client does. But they also have a lot more knowledge of the kind of problem they're trying to solve and other topics than you do. And so being humble and helping each other learn, I find to be a really successful way to approach that. We often hear stories of consultants who come in and walk and talk and act like they know everything, and they're generally unsuccessful in their implementation because they don't care about the customer. They only care about themselves, right? My job as a consultant is to help you be successful, right? I'm not here for me, for fame or any of that. I am here to help you do your job a little bit better so that you get the next promotion or so that somebody recognizes the hard work that you've done, right? If you get that recognition, then I've been successful as a consultant. So I think that foundation of mutual respect is really important. I think being able to ask good questions is important as well. So it depends a little bit on the space that you're in, but asking questions to clarify, or saying, do you know why it's done that way? Right? Have you always done it that way? Right? Or do you see gaps in how this is currently done? Asking these kind of questions can really help people open up, right? Or asking them, what about this current process is difficult or painful for you? What do you wish was done differently or easier, right? If there was any one part of this that's not worth your time, which one is it, right? So those things can help you identify specific pain points or low-hanging fruit that you can get some quick wins with your client, and then you can focus on the longer term ones. But getting a few quick wins gives you some credibility and helps them free up some time and build some of that respect as well. So I think those things are important too.
Yeah, we are just filled with jargons. It's not about it's not about working with the absolutes of the Power BI or the Tableau or any analytic tool, all about the frameworks which we are fascinated about. TensorFlow comes out with a new framework. Everybody wants to learn it, but nobody wants to take the pain of reading the documentation and analyzing what's actually good in this, what's actually bad in this, what are all the features that I can exploit, or else what can be my contribution. Of course, there are open source contributors there. Of course, company pays for open source contributors sometimes. It's like they are being paid for actually doing that amount of work. Of course, it's not a charity. You are taking money. So, but I just want to ask you this one question, because you have seen people who are actually talking jargons and not doing the work. Of course, you have seen how consultants, of course, you also said that you have seen how consultants come to you and they portray that they know something, but in fact they might not be able to work a bit in that also. But like, how is technology an influence today in making wrong decisions? Because it's huge, but how is it as an influence to make a wrong decision?
I think the biggest one that I see on that right now is that technology, I guess in general, but specifically algorithms and other forms of assistance for decision making, can have some built-in biases based on whatever data they included at the start. And so to an extent, all data is biased because somebody decided what to collect, to whom they would collect it from, and how those questions were phrased, that sort of thing. So what I see happening pretty commonly in the world right now is algorithms that were built with a series of historical data have some built-in biases, right? So often this is biases against members of visible minorities, Black, Indigenous, peoples of color, these groups, also against women in particular disciplines as well. And there's a number of other groups as well that are essentially fundamentally disadvantaged by poorly thought out algorithms that didn't take into account that maybe there was systemic challenges for a particular group in the population. So if we base all of our algorithms on those historical assumptions, we won't create the opportunity for people to get ahead, right? So there has to be kind of a balance here where, maybe we want to consider how we appropriately weight different variables to make sure that we're not just reinforcing stereotypes or worse that have happened over the last 30, 50, whatever years that's appropriate in your business. So I think systemic bias in algorithms is probably the biggest one that I would say is a major blocker to making better decisions with data right now. That as data professionals, we tend to default to the data will tell us what we need to know. And that's only partially true. So we need to be really careful with how we choose to use the data and understand what it was when it was collected and what the impetus for that was. So those things go a long way. And I think there's lots of online forums and articles that can help you learn more on that topic. It's a new topic to me as well. And I think we can all put some effort into learning more about those things so that we don't perpetuate these challenges going forward, so that we can do our best to help improve them. I think those things are really important going forward.
Yeah, I think last question that I just really wanted to ask you is that
Sure.
what's the most fascinating and the most inspiring concept that you have ever seen in the world of economics, data science, that you have come across?
Mm, interesting. So actually, this one's pretty new to me. So I started reading about behavioral economics, call it about a month ago. And so I got exposed to an author named Richard Thaler, who's I think now from the University of Chicago. And his most famous contribution to this space is the idea of the nudge. And so there's a book called Nudge. And the general idea is that we can have these sort of subtle indicators through the choice architecture that we employ to help people make better decisions. So a really good example of this is, many companies where employees are lucky enough to have a company that contributes to their retirement plan in some way. Many of them will have things like matching programs or similar, where an employee puts in a certain amount of money and then the employer will match that contribution. What the research found on this is that when it was an opt-in system, so the employee had to say, I would like to join the pension plan, or I would like to join the matching part of the pension plan, it was generally not successful. People went with, many people did not actually apply by the deadlines because it was too much effort, those kind of things, or they didn't take advantage of the matching programs, or they didn't change to an appropriate portfolio, financially speaking. So what Taylor and his group worked on was, how could we better influence this, right? What if we changed the default so that everybody was opted in at a reasonable level, and then we could change what would happen after that. So everybody's opted in by default. Suddenly your participation rates go way up. And now the people who historically wouldn't have taken advantage of that get a level playing field with others who have more of a background in, say, financial training or something like that. We can also do different things to help them contribute more over time. And I forget the exact term that they use for this, but the basic idea is people really struggle to increase their contributions right away. So if you told many people today, well, to make your retirement a reality, you should contribute 10% more now and do that going forward, most people won't do that because it's too big of a jump for them to take on at once. So what they recommend instead is a more gradual approach. So they say, maybe you don't contribute anything now, or maybe you contribute 1% more now instead of 10. But the next time you get a raise, we'll get you to contribute some other amount more at that point. So every time you get a raise, you're contributing a little bit more. And what they found through that kind of setup was actually that people contributed way more through this bank the rest, I think it was, kind of notion. But basically, you're not doing much more now, but in the future, when you get paid more money, you're going to contribute more of that new money to your pension plan. And the people who went with that plan ultimately contributed noticeably more than the people who just did the bump of 10% in the beginning. And so how we choose to set up these kind of structures can go a long way. And I think there's huge overtones for technology as well. So encouraging our users, making it easy for them to make the best choice for them without forcing them into, like a multi-year subscription, that kind of weird, shady stuff. You don't want to do that. But you do want to make it easy for them to decide on something rather than overwhelming them. And I think nudges are an important concept towards making that more possible, especially if you use them ethically. There's lots of examples in tech where it's really not, right? The display a notification on your phone every 10 seconds is really not a good use of nudges, in my view. But there are helpful ones, right? Like sometimes you need that. In Canada, for example, yesterday was the deadline for retirement contributions for the year. And so having a reminder through your banking app or through your phone or something like that to say, hey, you've got a week until the deadline. If you're planning to contribute to this year, you better get your act together. That's a helpful nudge if they don't do it every single day. So those kind of things I think can be really helpful in the technology space too. We can make our users' lives easier through the choice architecture that we provide. And it's something I think we can all learn from.
Yeah, I know. That's true. That's true, because learning process is something which is more humongous. It's not about how big are you, how rich are you tomorrow. It's because you need to have that ethic of being the best person to the world. You need not have to be the best person in everything. Even if you're doing one thing, if you just keep your heads down, do that proper, you're just going to be something humongous one day. That's for sure. Thank you so much for that. And lately, you gave a lot of references to the books
Yeah,
for behavioral economic. Sorry, what's that?
economics. Yeah.
Behavioral
Yeah.
economics. You gave a reference to behavioral economics. You gave a reference to a lot of resources. Are there any real books that you really want the viewers or any person to just read? A must-read list of books.
Oh, yeah, great question. So given my recent experience, I would recommend Nudge to learn more about behavioral economics for sure. In the analytics space, I got my start with competing on analytics and highly recommend anything by Tom Davenport. I think books that can help us understand the bias that may be present in our data is a good possibility. So an author named Ben Jones has a number of different books on common data pitfalls or data literacy, those kinds of topics. I think those are important. If you're into the visualization space, anything by Alberto Cairo goes a really long way to helping you understand. I think his most recent is How Charts Lie, which I'm still looking forward to reading, but everything else I've read by him is so helpful that it's definitely on the list. Yeah. I think the general advice, though, is read anything and everything that you can. So my reading tends to be a little bit more in business and psychology and data, but there's lots of learning that I can get from outside that space. And sometimes the most valuable learning is outside your area of expertise. So this is part of why I'm learning more about economics these days is, specifically behavioral economics, is because it's not a discipline that I had been exposed to previously, and I think I can learn from it. So that's part of why I'd recommend those as well.
Yeah, any books for business, like MBA grads should read this book. Any MBA grad should read this book.
I think probably the first one I'd recommend, I mentioned it earlier, is The Lean Startup. It's a really good way to think about launching a small business and perfecting your ideas as you move forward. I think those are really important. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew, for this amazing podcast. Andrew Drinkwater has been something who have seen in one show who just fascinated me. Yes, I should do a podcast with him. I think probably there was no error in the internet, and we had a successful second re-recording of this podcast. And thank you so much for this amazing podcast, sir.
You're very welcome. Thanks for including me. I look forward to seeing it, and don't hesitate to send anything afterwards if there was something that needs a follow-up.
Yeah.